Welcome to this month's Creation Justice webinar, a gathering place for building a faith-rooted and faith-sustained movement addressing many of the critical issues of our time. I'm Brooks Barrett, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ. I'm joined by my co-host, the Reverend Michael Malcolm, who is the Executive Director for the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. Michael, the philosopher Feuerbach once said, theology is anthropology. Sometimes theology can say more about the person espousing it than it says about God. Today, we're going to hear about theology that destroys and theology that transforms. I have the feeling we're going to learn a lot about both God and people today. What do you think?
Yeah, Brooks. You know what? I find it without coincidence. Excuse me. I find it without coincidence that our description of today's webinar is packed with power. Derrick Weston's writing is filled with power. The Reverend Shawn Anglim's preaching and practice are packed with power. Alan Johnson's speaking is packed with power. I find it providential that all this power is gathered on this call, as they represent a powerful God and a powerful movement. However, I want you to see how this power is really applied. Just as God uses God's power for the betterment of God's creation, so does Derrick in his writing. So does Reverend Shawn in his proclamation and practice. So does Alan in his advocacy. This is what it is to be a steward of creation. Poor interpretation has led to poor theology. Greed has governed us in secular and sacred spaces. Our guest and audience represents those who are resisting the influence of toxic theology. They provide treatment for this sickness. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Michael, for setting us up today and setting the stage. Let me introduce our three panelists in the order in which they'll be speaking. First, we'll hear from Derrick Weston, who's the Director of Theological Education and Formation for Creation Justice Ministries. Through podcasts and film, he has highlighted the work of people of faith for food justice. He is also the author of the book, The Just Kitchen: Invitations to Sustainability, Cooking, Connection, and Celebration. Alan Johnson is co-founder and coordinator of Christians for the Mountains, whose core mission is to honor the earth, to honor the truth of Psalm 24, verse 1, the earth and all it contains belongs to God. The organization has addressed extractive energy abuses in Central Appalachia. Alan and his wife have lived in rural West Virginia for 50 years with gardens and poultry amid the beauty of nature. And then finally, we have the Reverend Shawn Moses Anglim, who is the pastor of First Grace United Methodist Church, the merger of an historical Black church and an historical white church in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. During his leadership, the church established two missions: Hagar's House, a residence for women, trans women, and children without a home, and Project Ishmael, a free legal clinic for immigrant children. We are grateful and delighted to have all three of you with us today. Derrick, if you can start things off for us, that'd be terrific.
Sure, Brooks. Thank you for having me here. I'm glad to be with you all today. Every year, Creation Justice Ministries creates a resource. We've used to refer to it as our Earth Day resource, but we have since started referring to it as our annual resource, recognizing that we want this to be an evergreen, year-long resource that can speak to the church at any point in the calendar year. We, the staff and the board of Creation Justice Ministries gets together every May, and we try to discern what the following year's theme will be. And we knew that we were going to be on the other side of the election by the time that the resource came out. And so we were trying to think of a theme that would speak to either outcome that we were facing in November. And one of the things that kept emerging was the fact that regardless of who won, we would be needing to speak truth to power, that we would be needing to speak about power and the way that power is used in our society. And because of how the election turned out in November, we have seen some very clear understandings of the ways that power can be misused in our culture, and particularly the way that it can be misused in terms of setting law, setting policy, and the ways that it can be used in terms of care and protection of our creation or the lack thereof. One of the very first things that this new administration did was begin to peel back environmental protections. And so with that conversation, we came up with the theme, the power of God, moving from extractive theology to transformative faith. There was a lot of conversation about how people would hear those words, the power of God, recognizing that some of us have come from traditions where that phrase has been used in some ways that maybe weren't as helpful and life-giving as they could be. But when it came down to it, we decided that this was both about how we as humans make power and how we as humans use power. That this was both about the ways that we create power, whether we are going to continue to extract oil, natural gas, and coal from the planet's body, or turn to more renewable, sustainable forms of creating power. But it was also about how we use our power for good, how we use our collective power, how we use our communal power. And so a big part of this is the theological framing of the resource, thinking about the ways that power shows up in Scripture. We see very clear contrasts in power. We see the way that pharaohs and kings use power. We see the way that Rome uses power in Jesus's time to accumulate wealth, to accumulate resources, to stamp down opposition, and to bring people to heel. Contrast that with the way that Jesus uses power. Jesus uses power to heal. Jesus uses power to uplift. Jesus uses power to build community and bring people in. And ultimately, Jesus uses power in self-sacrificial ways, or in giving his own life. But Jesus' power doesn't stop there. Jesus' power is the kind of power that brings life from death. And that's the kind of power that we are empowered to use as those who are the body of Christ. So throughout this resource, we give this theological framing, we give some sermon starters, we give some liturgical resources that people can use in their churches in thinking about the ways that they address this. One of the more powerful experiences of creating this resource was we had our second annual songwriting retreat where 7 original songs were produced for this resource. And I'm very proud of the song writers and song makers, music makers who were a part of that process. And so as you download this resource, you'll be able to have access to those pieces. You will see if you go to www.creationjustice.org/power of God, if you scroll down, you will see that there has been a specially branded, co-branded version of the resource that we made with the United Church of Christ. And thanks for the partnership that we have with you all, the good work that you all are doing, and your long commitment to creation justice, and the great gift it is to be in communion and fellowship with you all. So I just want to encourage, one of the other pieces that is a part of this resource are stories. And you're going to hear some of the stories that are a part of the resource, stories of churches using collective power to build community, to heal community, to embrace community, to speak against extraction and all of the ways that it can exist in our economy. This resource feels incredibly timely. As we see just this week, the idea that protections might be rolled back in our national forests and national parks to be open for logging. As we see that there's this move happening to continue to drill, to continue to invest in coal, to continue to put our resources into taking from the earth in violent ways to create power to keep our economy going. We believe that there's another way that we can live in a way that is more in harmony with the way that creation itself works. We believe that there is a model of power that can be demonstrated, which is the way that God uses power to heal, to uplift, to restore, to renew, and to give life. And we want this resource to be something that churches can use, yes, for Earth Day as it's coming up the next couple of weeks, but throughout the rest of the year, as you're thinking about the ways that we speak up against extractive forces that exist in our world, as we speak up against extractive theology that says that our role as humans is to dominate and to take what we can for our own benefit, as we speak up against the forces that are happening in our economy that are saying that all we have to do is just continue to take and take and take and not think about what the world, what God's good world gives to us. So I'm excited about this resource. You know, we wouldn't have asked for it to be released, to be in this context, but we believe that we are built for this moment. We believe that this resource is built for this moment. And we believe that the body of Christ is built for this moment, to speak the truths that need to be spoken, and to be a part of demonstrating life-giving power and not life-taking power.
Thank you so much, Derrick, for outlining that life-giving theological approach that Creation Justice Ministries is bringing to us with this resource. We'll turn now to Alan Johnson.
Thank you, and I appreciate being invited to be on this panel. And Derrick, look forward to your resource coming up. Just a little bit about Christians for the Mountains. It's a network of persons advocating that Christians and their churches recognize their God-given responsibility to live compatibly, sustainably, and gratefully joyous upon this God's earth. Christians for the Mountains is non-denominational and non-partisan. We take a critical prophetic stance to advocate for justice, righteousness, and peace for the land and its inhabitants. And we seek to be respectful to all voices seeking truth. The Central Appalachian region is our geographical focus, and stopping abuse to the land and its inhabitants is an important work. However, we are not only against abuse, but importantly for a sound, clean, sustainable economy with high quality of life and sufficiency of material goods, neighborliness, social and ecological harmony, richness and culture, mutual service, and bright hope. Rebuilding Appalachia from the ravages of 150 years of exploitation and ruination is our dream. We want to rebuild, restore, recreate. God has created an extraordinary, wondrous, beautiful creation for God's own will, pleasure, and purpose. And in Genesis 2:15 through 17, we understand that God created humans to share and acknowledge the goodness of creation with God. God gave us humans the responsibility to nurture and protect creation and the corresponding privilege to gain sustenance from creation, but within boundaries that humans are not to usurp God's creation order. Andrea, could have first slide, please? I'm going to have some slides. Okay. Just noticed, and Brooks mentioned this, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. That's Psalm 24:1. We kind of use that as our key scripture. In other words, the earth is God's property. And we have the privilege, responsibility with it, but we run across this all the time with companies and corporations say, oh, that's our land and we own it. We can do whatever we want with it. Well, we can't, according to God. Notice that the biblical lands are mountainous terrain. The beauty and majesty of mountains lifts our eyes heavenward to ponder the immeasurably greater majesty and love of our Creator. Yet too often, mountains are defiled. Andre, next slide, please. Okay. This photo was taken by my drone. I have a drone for reasons like this, to over the 2,000-acre Twilight surface mine in West Virginia. And that's part of a 12 square mile surface mine complex, basically mountaintop removal. I'll explain that in a moment. You'll see on the very top, you'll see this little knoll, little hill with the woods on the top, and that's the Gerald Family Cemetery, which is protected by law from being totally blown up. All the other areas are blown up. Now you can see the second growth forest. Appalachia has beautiful, wonderful forests, and but the contrast is stark. And that much of this land is so-called reclaimed, and you see how well it's a moonscape. Okay, what's mountaintop removal is think of a chocolate layered cake. You have the cake, and then you have these little layers of icing. And think of the icing as the coal, and there might be a seam of 1.5 to 2 foot thick coal, and then 50 to 70 foot of rock on top of it, and then another layer of coal, and so forth and so forth, up to 7 layers sometimes. And with explosives and heavy equipment, that mountain is blown apart. The coal is scraped out, and the remaining rock, which is about 97% of that mountain, is just that is blown up, is shoved down the valley, called a valley fill. And it does not employ very many workers compared to underground mining. So that's profitable for the coal industry. However, it is very harmful, the pollution to water, air, and life. Next slide, please. Okay. Christians for the Mountains is activist oriented. I took this photo in front of the White House gate a few years ago. But we believe that we have to have feet on the ground somehow or another, whether it's letter writing or nonviolent direct action, political advocacy. We had an office in DC for a few years trying to work on a health bill. And I might mention that we, as a Christian organization, but we work with all people who have voices of conscience. We're welcomed at these rallies. We are asked to, in these gatherings, we were asked to pray. We were asked to speak. And one of the couple of the topics that I oftentimes use, one is for direct action, I'll use the story of Jesus overthrowing the money changers' tables in the temple. You know that story. And another one I oftentimes use is in 1 Kings at the end of that book about Naboth's vineyard that King Ahab and Jezebel coveted and then murderously plotted to overthrow and get that vineyard. And then, of course, the prophet Elijah speaks out strongly on that. So we do have activism. I want to say that person in the middle in the kind of the green shirt, that's Larry Gibson, who died in 2012. But he is the father of the anti-mountaintop removal movement. And I'll tell you a story about how Christians for the Mountains started. In May of 2005, that's 20 years ago coming up, some of us gathered together, about 2 dozen, in Charleston, West Virginia. Now, we were Christians. We were basically environmental activists. We'd known that, but we knew that we were also Christians. And so Bob Marshall and I invited us to get together. And we decided, it was an overnight place at St. John's Episcopal Church in Charleston, but we took a field trip up to Caford Mountain, where Larry Gibson has there's a small 50-acre family foundation in the midst of mountaintop removal all around. And you can see it, operations going on. So we were going to take a tour. And we were going to get there at 12 at noon. And we got there about 1:30. And Larry Gibson comes up to me as soon as I got there, and he says, right, and puts his finger and says, "Why are you so late?" I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get everybody herding the cats, and all that together." And he said, "No, why are you church people so late doing anything about mountaintop removal? Where have you all been?" Well, chastised, and we went back, and that's when we that next day we formed Mountaintop. Christians for the Mountains. And basically, we didn't have any money. We passed a hat around, had about $100, but we decided we'd build a toolkit. And we had a DVD, and our goal was to get Christian people and church leaders up in the air. We can get airplane flights and see mountaintop removal and be advocates. I mentioned about Larry Gibson. He has had so much influence on people, thousands of people who tour the mountaintop removal, and his courage. And so we have sponsored a biography of over 1,200 pages on him and the movement in West Virginia. Something he would say to people: "What in your life is so precious that no amount of money would buy it?" And he would say, "In my homeland, my mountains." Okay, would you go now? Next slide, please. Okay, so we are also involved with advocacy. So a number of years ago, Professor Michael Hendricks at West Virginia University was seeing data from the Centers for Disease Control that seemed like people living in communities close to mountaintop removal were sicker, had higher rates of cancer, respiratory diseases, asthma, COPD, cancer, and birth defects. So there's a man named Peter Illian with Restoring Eden, and we began to recruit college students on their spring break in March. And because college breaks are staggered, usually we could get groups for about 3 weeks, train them and send them out to knock on doors and gather family health histories. And we'd also go to areas without mountaintop removal with the same type of people with same culture and lifestyles, and get that data and compare. And several peer-reviewed studies were written up by Dr. Hendricks showing that much higher incidence amount of community health problems. We believe it's because of the nanoparticulates. Now, that is, when the blasting happens, it puts out some very tiny molecules, sometimes nanoparticulates, much smaller than the 2.5 or 10 standards that the EPA uses. And these go directly in the bloodstream. They can't be filtered out by the nostrils and the lungs. And they go into the bloodstream. That creates inflammation, creating heart disease, cancer, and they go through the placental barriers. So we were finding high rates of birth defects too. But what is important is, besides these studies, these students, most of them coming from conservative Christian colleges, nursing majors, sociology majors, going to be teachers, and so forth like that. It opened their eyes up. It shocked them. Some of them changed their majors. And that's an important lesson, I think, is that we need to get our young people out where the rubber hits the road, where they're working in communities of poverty, where they're seeing areas that are devastated by pollution and so forth. Yes, it can be a little bit risky, but being a Christian is risky, and that builds their faith. It's becomes something that's down in their heart. Just mention in closing, or almost closing, we do have a bill in Congress, the Appalachian Community Health Emergency. The acronym is ACE Act, trying to get that passed to get a moratorium on new mountaintop removals permits, but that's hit Congress, as you know. And then we have a program in mind, working with some other organizations that we are sponsoring: the Healing Landscapes for Healthy Communities, Nature-Based Ecological Restoration, the Degraded Landscapes, to link with healthy landscapes into kind of a public-private restoration type park. And just to say, we also have a twice yearly newspaper, the Mountain Vision newspaper. It's free. We have about 2,200 on our mailing list. We have a website. We believe that Scripture affirms a link between human justice and environmental justice. Reverence for God is reverence and respect for God's creation. Defiling nature and defiling humans and human society are linked. So we are volunteer run completely, primarily with donations to cover expenses, and we partner with and work with numerous religious and secular organizations locally, regionally, and nationally. So thank you very much for your time, and appreciate that. And you can end the slide. Go back to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. You gave us some good nuggets of wisdom there. Being Christian is risky. I like that. I jotted that down and some other things. I appreciate you and what you had to share. We now turn it to Shawn for our last panelist. Nope. Gotta unmute there.
Thank you for reminding me to unmute. And I just want to say I saw someone from Asheville is on, and I just want you to know we have people in our congregation from that area, and we're thinking of you and hoping that you keep finding a way forward. And hello to Judson Memorial. I was an intern pastor at Washington Square United Methodist Church in Greenwich Village, which was half a block from Judson. The building was falling down, and now I believe it's the Church of the Village. So I think the way I would introduce, my own spirituality is we have an insurance issue in New Orleans and Louisiana, like many coastal places, and so we're trying to figure out what the heck to do about it. Our church, like many churches, is self-insured, and we recently found out that New Zealand has been uninsurable since like 1968 or 72 or something, and so they are self-insured, the entire nation. And that means that when a disaster strikes, earthquakes for them, everyone is insured for the first $300,000. And New Zealand's gross national product is 2.5. Well, Louisiana's gross national product is 4.5 billion. So, what does that remind us again and again? There are different ways to do things. We just haven't tried them. And quite often, there are significant vested forces in not letting us go in these new directions when it's very possible. And so that is sort of, the way I look at my own church, First Grace. We had a terrible storm here, Hurricane Katrina. I came here with my wife and a 3-year-old, and she was pregnant. And like everybody else, no place to go to school, trying to figure out, what the way forward was. And a historical black church, Grace, and historical white church, First, were 1 mile apart. They were both Methodist, and I was assigned to those two churches and several others. And through a series of mysterious things, I ended up working with those two churches. And it became clear to me that I thought a way forward was to create a new body. And, why would Black people trust white people? Well, first of all, there's only 17 white people and there's only 24 Black people. Like, that's what's left. What are we going to do? The Black church has a big hole in their wall. This church had 5 feet of water in it. And, you have to really believe people want to be faithful. You have to trust people, and you have to invite them. You have to give people the opportunity to be faithful. And you have to do it with tremendous love. And I went on a retreat asking the Spirit to give me a question, and I came back with a question I posed to the leaders individually. Do you think we can do more for our city? It's not about Grace. It's not about First. It's about where we live. Can we do more for our city as one body of Christ, more than we could ever do as two bodies of Christ, 1 long mile apart? It's a very dangerous question, because I think when the Spirit's giving you an opportunity, if you don't respond to it, the Spirit just goes somewhere else, gives somebody else the opportunity. But people said yes, and here we are 18 years later, First Grace. And I think of us as joy on Sunday morning and justice all week long. And most recently, what we have done is we've helped start Together New Orleans. It is a IAF, if you're familiar with that kind of organizing organization, and we have a terrific organizer, Broderick Baggart. Everybody should know that name, Broderick Baggart Jr. And one of our most recent things is what we call community lighthouses. And what happened was we had Hurricane Francine 2 years ago, middle of August, all the power goes out for 2 weeks. And, we're like, really? Is this the best way to do things? To run a bunch of wires on pixie sticks when you live this close to a hurricane alley? And like, is there no other way to do this? And somebody said, well, we ought to just raise some money and get solar panels on churches and mosques and nonprofits and some battery backup. And I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. And I thought that'll never happen. And we put together a plan. We went to the Greater New Orleans Foundation, and we said, this is what we want to do. We want to create these little microgrids, and they gave us $1 million. And then we put up this microgrid in one of the largest Black churches in LaPlace that had a very strong disaster relief program. And then we invited people to go see it. And then we had a conference, we had a gathering with about 1,500 people. Our mayor was there, city council was there, Troy Carter, Representative Troy Carter, Senate Representative. Troy Carter got us $3.8 million to do this. The city gave us $2 million that night, and we've been rolling. We now have 15 microgrids on churches and community health centers. With 38 is the plan. And as we're doing this, we're thinking very carefully. What does job development look like? We have hired Black-owned electricians that are unionized to do the electrical work. We have gotten them to partner with Green Corps, which is like young people who need a second chance, train them for green jobs, has teamed up with them, and they help put the solar panels in at First Grace. And so it's, we are a drop in the bucket, but it's a noticeable drop in the bucket. And our first trial run was with Hurricane Ida, I should say. Hurricane Ida was when we came up with this idea. Hurricane Francine happened this summer. Power goes out. First Grace lights up. By that afternoon, we had more than 100 people who were now hot with their children in an air-conditioned fellowship hall. The city called us and said, can we distribute our oxygen tanks out of your church because you have power? So people who needed oxygen tanks were coming to the church. The cities called us. The Salvation Army calls us. Can we set up our food truck? The food bank calls us. Can we set up the food in your church? All because we were one of the people who had power. And we began to see the power of this, and so did everybody else. So tomorrow morning, we have a press conference with our city council, who has total regulatory authority over the utility company. It's a rare situation. And they have told the utility company, you need to be building these microgrids. We've worked with them to change that policy over the last several years. The churches and the religious community have built 15 microgrids. The utility company has built 0, and they're the monopoly. So I believe after this press conference, which is going to be make a joyful noise, it'll be New Orleans style. There'll be bells and drums and lots of smiley faces. But I believe enough of our city officials are there that there'll be some noticeable movement on the part of city council to force their hand. But I guess I would just end by saying, I just find again and again, there are different ways to do it. Just as our first speaker started off with, there are different types of power. And we may not have the money or the lobbyist, But if you get people power and you get organized and you know what you want, it's hard not to listen to 1,500 people at a rally when you have the archbishop, you have pastors there, majority Black pastors and several white pastors like me. It's very hard not to listen to that kind of power. So I just want to encourage us to keep doing these talks, keep hearing from each other, keep believing the gospel, and keep looking at New Zealand and who just figures out how to do it differently. Thank you so much for having me, and please come visit.
Thank you, Rev. I want to open it up with questions, and I'm actually going to ask the first question from my personal preference, a personal privilege, and this is to Alan. Alan, you spoke about how and rest in peace to Brother Peter Illian, by the way. But you spoke about Brother Peter, and while you are doing surveys, you talked about another legend that was out there that confronted you about the church missing in action. How was that confrontation for you? How was that? How did that move you all? And the reason I'm asking this is because we've got a bunch of church folk on the call, in particular pastors, who also are worthy of being confronted right now because they're missing in action. And so I'm wondering how was that confrontation for you? I know the outcomes, but how was it to experience that in that moment? You're on mute.
Larry Gibson would do that, and he did that to push us. I mean, why are you so late? Why are you church people so late when our mountains are getting blown up? And then he would say, "But I'm thank you, you're here." And we began, but that was to jolt us. Now he told a story. He had been on a panel somewhere, a conference or something, and he said during that time, a clergyman from a mainline church said, "Larry, I've heard your talk. I know you don't like your mountains being blown up for coal, but we need," and this guy was from New York or somewhere, "we need your energy. We need coal energy for our electricity. And you need to be patriotic and let us have that. I'm sorry it hurts you, but we need it." And Larry's response was, "You're looking up at us as collateral damage." And I mean, that's what he thought. And at that time, he was pretty upset with the church, and he was for years to come. Now, in his later years, he came around. I want to say came around to his boyhood faith and all that. But that was a prophetic stand, he said, and he wanted to push us, even though he appreciated us being there, to act. He would say this, and a lot of people came up there to see the mountains and take us tour, and he would always say, "Look, appreciate you being here, but if all you're going to do is look around, see your mountains being blown up, and go home and go on with your life, you have wasted my time." So he was very blunt, but he was also a very fun-loving person, mischievous, loving, kind, caring. But he had that direct stance, and that did push us and inspired us. And I can tell you, we could trace the Green New Deal, the divestment movement directly to Larry Gibson and the people he inspired. And he had about a fifth grade education. I mean, and he had formerly, he was during his adult career until he got hurt. He pushed a broom at a General Motors factory up in Ohio. When he got hurt, he finally came back to West Virginia and saw his beloved mountains being blown up. And he, yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Alan, for sharing that story. What an inspiring person. A question that maybe Shawn, you can answer first, but it's also, I think, a question that applies to Alan, which is, I'm seeing the 15 microgrids in your case, Shawn, and in Alan's case, I'm seeing that you once had a DC office and you had this, bill as in Congress being considered, but yet there was a time when you began with like an idea, right? Like, as you said, it was like this concept, like So, oh, sure, that's going to happen. We're going to have some solar panels. So I'm wondering if you can tell us something about, I'm sure it wasn't an easy journey from concept to finished project, or concept to going beyond passing the hat for $100. If you can think about particular moments of struggle where you really gained an insight or a lesson on that has stuck with you, right? That might be, shareable, as other people are maybe still in the concept stage, right? What uh insight or lessons have you learned, in the struggle from getting to concept to where you are today?
I think two things for me. Community helps you, because on days when you waver, someone else is often strong and it picks you up. And what I learned, I would say first with First Grace was, if you read the story from the scripture of the Israelites leaving Egypt, when they get across the Red Sea, everybody's like euphoric. We did it, 3 days later, they were saying, why did you take us out of Egypt? Egypt was great. We had all the food we wanted. We had plenty of work. Everybody was happy. And I think that's reminding us of human nature. We recreate narratives all the time, that aren't true, because we have a fantasy about things. But somebody has to keep walking into the wilderness. And I never want to get to the promised land. It's not that I want those trees and I want those streams. So when moments of doubt, you have to keep walking and believing that water's going to shoot from a rock and that manna is going to fall from heaven. I've certainly had those moments, not only in my ministry here, but we've just done some bold things here. Not everything works out, but I think you as a leader, you have to give people the opportunity to be faithful. And so maybe a quick example, I would talk about First Grace. When we merged, the first 4 or 5 months were totally discombobulating. And we had to, and people would say, well, we're not doing worship. We have a gospel choir and we have a white preacher, and so, you got to do it this way. You got to do it this. That's why this doesn't work. And you have to keep believing you'll figure out your flow, and the Spirit will find a way through that. But you have to keep moving forward. And I do think when the leader gets shaky, it gives people an excuse to be. You can be shaky, but you can't show it. You got to. I mean, maybe when your mother dies, you could show it. But and I think with Community Lighthouse, I'm sorry, I'm going on here. I knew we had a very good community organizer. I thought this was a total fantasy. And then we sat down with the plans. And we had a relationship with Greater New Orleans Foundation. And it's like, what are we going to ask them for? $1 million sounds like a good number. Let's go for it. Everybody just went through this hurricane. Are we going to do this the same way again? Let's ask them. And they liked Together New Orleans. And they it was a moment of truth, I think. So a good plan, you have to, the best plan you can come up with never works out, but you have to at least have one. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's give people the chance to be faithful.
That was great. I appreciate that. I think there's definitely some things all of us can take from what you just shared. I really appreciate that. Alan, you want to jump in on that?
Yes, I do, and I appreciate you're right about the faith, being faithful, and just to go forward and as the Spirit leads us. When we started Christians for the Mountains, we were a volunteer. We had an idea. We had a project to build a little toolkit, and we had done anything. Within 3 months later, we were in a 2-page spread in Newsweek magazine. How does that happen? Well, what happened in part was this is in the middle of the George Bush, the second administration, and they were looking for Christian organization or faith organization, you know, Christian, Jewish, whatever, that were involved with environmental activism, and they found us somehow or another, and even we hadn't done anything yet. There's a hunger for people who have faith, who are faithful, who are visionary, who are getting out of their buildings. And it's okay to be in our buildings, but get out in the buildings, get our feet on the ground, get messy, get our hands messy, and try things. And sometimes stick our neck out and fail, but we keep sticking our neck out, like you're saying, Shawn, and we go for it. And in partnering and finding those other groups that we can work with who have a common interest in, say, justice or microgrids. I have one of our steering committee persons is very involved with microgrids in West Virginia and working in Huntington and Charleston and getting those started. So it might be good for her to connect with you, Shawn, because that's what we want to do is connect with one another.
Michael, do you have a next question for us, or?
Yeah, sorry about that, Brooks. My mute got stuck. So I had a question actually for Brother Derrick. Brother Derrick, I know in your writings you write a lot about the power of God and different forms and ways. And one of your recent writings is about food and food insecurity and coming up with practical ways to deal with that. Where are you seeing the power of God transformatively, especially in the wake of what we're experiencing now with the withdrawal of benefits and resources and community? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I will definitely try. I think what we're seeing is people, as has been expressed several times in both stories, people remembering how much they need each other. People remembering how much they need community. People remembering that the impulse to isolate is a lot of what's getting us into trouble in the first place. And so I'm seeing a couple of initiatives that I'm looking at right now and getting ready to write about, of folks who are saying, you know, there are so many models of doing farms that look like homesteads that are quote unquote self-sufficient. What if those quote unquote self-sufficient farms were networked with one another? And what if particular if farmers of color were networking those farms with one another and creating markets for people who are in food insecure places, and using the resources of churches to do those sorts of things, using the resources and assets, things like commercial kitchens that a lot of our churches have, things like church lawns that can be removed and replaced with gardens and small farms, things like church vans that can be used to deliver produce. You know, I can't speak enough about the work of that Reverend Dr. Heber Brown III is doing right here in Baltimore with the Black Church Food Security Network. His is probably the most visible, but it is the beginning of a movement of people saying, what are the ways that we can link our resources together to begin to say that the way that we're going to get out of this is by leaning into community. The way that we're going to get out of this is by finding the power within community, and uplifting that power and using that power and mobilizing that power, to feed our communities, to give power and light to our communities, to find water for our communities, to find jobs for our communities. You know, I think we're all discovering in new ways the extent to which we need each other, and I think there's a real power in that.
I guess I'm asking the response more of the response from the community. Are they understanding that we are at a pivotal point where collective participation is the way of survival at this point, if you will. And I guess I can ask that to all of you all, but especially Reverend Shawn, knowing that you all have put services in place. I know that people take advantage of those services because they're beneficial for community, but how many others around you are actually feeding back into that because they actually see the impacts and see, as Brother Derrick has said, that we are actually at a pivotal point where collective participation, collective us coming together in a real sense and being that Acts church, where we sell all that we have to ensure that none are without. How has that response been from community and congregation, I ask?
Just, I'm so sorry. What I feel like you're asking, and this may be wrong, are you asking how many people have joined the church because of this?
No, I'm asking how many are feeding back into your programs. How many are actually depositing instead of just withdrawing?
Oh, it's interesting when referring to Community Lighthouse in particular. Well, I would say with our legal clinic for immigrant children and with our residents for houseless folks, there's a lot of community engagement around that, and a lot of people are engaged, volunteers. With Community Lighthouse, geez, that first time those lights went out, we had a very small vagabond group of members. I wasn't sure who's going to show up because who has power? Who can get there? Who left town? Who left and then, I guess all of us, we had 2 days of no power. So the first day, there were like 3 or 4 of us. I didn't know who was going to show up the next day to volunteer, but for me. And by 9 o'clock in the morning, there were like 7 or 8 members of my church who didn't say they were coming. They were there all day, welcoming people. So I'm not sure if I'm getting at your question, Rev. But I think the way I would say it is, when I tell the congregation, when somebody drives by our church, they should think something. That's that place. That's that place. It could be, that's that place where Black and white people are actually doing it together. That's where Hagar's house is. That's her project. That's where all those, undocumented people meet. That's that community lighthouse. But something, and they might say, I'll never go to church, but I know that church, and I think there's a lot of that in our city regarding how open our door is. Part of our spirituality is to say yes to everything. And some, all kinds of things have happened here that I wasn't so sure about. I'm still not, but people know us as an open door.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question, and the question I want to put to you is this. In our audience today, we've got pastors some of whom might be preaching a sermon on April 27th. We sometimes call that, Earth Sunday. I've heard some churches call it Creation Justice Sunday. So we've got some green team leaders out there. I want to, with our audience in mind, can you tell us what, for you, authentic solidarity looks like? What would authentic solidarity look like in the pulpit on April 27th? What would authentic solidarity look like in the next green team movement? People that are moved by what you've had to say about mountaintop removal, Alan, or, people that are moved by what you've had to say, Shawn, about the devastations that can be caused by hurricanes and what a community can do to bounce back and be empowered and to do incredible things. And so, and I'm thinking about, Larry Gibson's remark, don't go back and make me feel like I wasted my time, right? So what does that authentic solidarity look like? Alan, you want to go for that first?
I would say one way of solidarity, and this might seem like a solitude, is to get out in the God's creation. And it can be done in a lawn. You can be looking at a flower, or you can go out in the woods. I'm thinking of upside down, but important book person was George Washington Carver, who would get out into the woods at 4 a.m. for a couple hours, just spend time. He'd talk to the flowers and things. And he was God moved so much into him through this connection that he would go back to his lab and didn't even have a book. He just knew what to do. He had his orders, and he made amazing contributions to science. But we need to get out and have time with in nature, not just to be out there, but to have time to meditate and to pray and to be taught lessons. God would teach us through creation. And then come back and share with one another. So what you learn.
Yeah.
Shawn, any thoughts on solidarity?
I just want to tell you what comes to mind. We have an organic community garden, and we had a robust green team until the pandemic. Now they're about to reboot. But I asked a member of the church to give an Earth Day sermon a few years back. She's a Black member of the church. And her Earth Day sermon was eye-opening. Essentially, she told her mother's story, who grew up in rural Mississippi on a farm, parents with no education, growing most of their own food, coming to New Orleans, doing any kind of job, and becoming economically stable. And now this person has a PhD and is the dean of Loyola University. And her point was, when you see someone like me driving around in a nice car, please don't judge us. We're finally, because our footprint has been very small our entire generation. My mother's footprint was very small. And that sounds like a backwards solidarity, but it is, you have to meet people where they are, and you have to respect people and their stories. And then you have to find the way to tell people this is our story. We are all going to give our children a story, and they're not going to be separated by the quality of the air. And the only one with drinking water is going to be people with money. So, you have to really listen to the different concerns that people have, I think, and hear their life, and then figure out how you invite them to be faithful. And I think that takes tremendous humility and boldness to I think it doesn't help to be preached at. It helps to be lifted up. And I want people to walk out the door lifted up, no matter how much truth I tell. What's the damn good news today? That's why I came here. And so, maybe I'm in a unique setting, but you have to, the ancients say the first act of love is to listen. And I think if you don't understand, if you keep listening long enough, eventually you do understand. And then people really feel heard. And now we have a common story. Where are we going? So that's what I would offer. And what I do, my most bold Earth Day things, I do them in the children's moment. So like this time I wrote a little song about one day God created the earth, and I have all this, rocks and trees and birds and bees and worms that like to eat dirt, and little kids like us that like to eat dessert. And earth ain't so bad after all, so we better take care of it if we want to eat dessert. Who doesn't want to eat some chocolate cake and a strawberry milkshake? So that's kind of how I'm always looking for that joyful angle in the truth, I guess, for people.
Derrick, I think you got a song for next year's resource there. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to each of you. Michael, any closing words? I'm filled with gratitude for our speakers. I want just a quick mention later this month. EART is the UCC Earth Summit. We're going to hear about the struggle against environmental racism in North Texas. We're going to hear from the world famous climate scientist, Catherine Hayhoe. So I'm going to put the link in there. Please check out that. It's going to be some inspiring speakers on that day. But Michael, anything you want to close us out with?
Well, Brooks, I think Brother Shawn has already preached us out of here, so there's no need in us going much further than that. I do want to let you all know, just as a quick shout out, Brother Derrick and I are part of a book series that we're co-writing together, and so get ready to look forward to that when those books come out. I'm looking forward to reading his and hope he's looking forward to reading mine. But thank you all again for being here with us. Thank you for your contributions to the kingdom. And again, be blessed.
All right. Thank you. Gratitude all the way around. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to our speakers. We appreciate each of you and all that you had to share. It was a gift. All right. Take care, everyone.